Hello, friends, and welcome to the very early morning version of Bible study on Adventures in Pixieland. I had a planned outdoor activity today, and in Arizona, that's best to be done very early in the morning if you're going to do that kind of thing. So, we are in the NIV. 1 Corinthians. We're going to go from 10, verse 24 into 11, verse 16. This is a letter from the Apostle Paul. Now, as I have stated before, there are absolutely times when I do not agree with the Apostle Paul. He's going to speak multiple things in here that very clearly I will not agree with this man on. Now, you could also be like, oh, why are you going to read it? It's in here. Then I'm not skipping. We're not skipping because there's lessons in here. And there is even a lesson at the very last line for the parts that I don't agree with. And I will expound on it then. So, verse 24, chapter 10. Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others. So what you do for good of others, not just to benefit yourself. If you're trying to do it only to benefit yourself, we call that being selfish, right? We have a term for that. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. That's very true. Everything's sanctified through God. If you pray over your food, it doesn't really matter where it came from. Even if it was sacrificed to an idol, which I doubt you're worried about these days, but in this time frame was very much a big concern for them, because the soul contract, and if you actually go through and read the Old Testament, he's real strict with his rules with them, because they were a very stiff-necked people. But there are times when I'm like, wow. There must have been other things going on there. Because ordinarily, he just doesn't make people burst into flames. But there's some of that in the Old Testament. So, praying over your food will rededicate it to him. And then you don't have to worry about it. But that's not one of the suggestions that they were being given. 27. If some unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever it is before you without causing any reasons of questions of conscience. Because not everybody dedicates their food to anything. Some people just cook food. Most people just cook food. You kind of have to be sort of devout before you're dedicating your food. It's like a level of devoutness. Like, how many people do you actually see praying over their food when you're out to eat? Because this is probably how many people are actually doing it in their homes too. And that percentage of you can take a statistical analysis of a sort if you like. You'll see what you think. But if anyone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the man who told you and for conscience sake. The other man's conscience, not yours. For why should my freedom be judged by another's conscience? And that's a good point right there, too. Just because you find something offensive doesn't mean everybody else finds something offensive. And, just because it would make somebody else feel guilty for doing that doesn't mean it has to make you feel guilty for doing that. That's a choice. You're absorbing their values then. And he didn't tell you to blindly follow the leader. In fact, he tells you repeatedly not to. If you are blindly following the leader and the leader sins, you are then culpable in the leader's sin. There's no way around that. He shows us that in the Old Testament repeatedly. If you want to argue, stop, go through and reread. Find the parts with David. Do a Google search. It's not that hard. Pull your Bible off the shelf. Maybe it's a little dusty or something because, they can get that way if we haven't been reading them ourselves. But you're here, so maybe you read it and it's not dusty at all. No judgment. Everybody goes through phases in their life, and that's just how it is. Go take a look and reread the story of David. I mean, there's literally one part in there where God gives him 3 choices, and in those 3 choices, there is one of those that only affects him and doesn't affect all his people, and he chooses one of the ones that affect his people. It will affect him. He'll suffer with them, but it will affect his people. And he chooses that one, and he's considered the best king that they've ever had. Blindly following the leader, which is really what they're doing. Every single time there's a leader that shows up and they want to like switch from worshiping God to worshiping the demons that are in the area. They're just like, oh, I guess we're supposed to worship demons now. And that's just what they do. Okay, blindly follow the leader. If, verse 30, if I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? Like, so again, your intention towards the meal matters. So if you pray over it, okay, it won't be a problem anymore. So whether you eat or drink, whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everybody in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but for the good of many, so that they may be saved. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So, what he's saying here is like, if they tell you, if you're a person of faith, and they tell you this food was sacrificed, and they name some deity that isn't just the word God. Because these days, when we say God, we're talking about this God, because God fulfilled his promise to Abraham. God's worship is everywhere. The Jewish blood did get mixed in with the royal bloodlines. They did end up, at least a certain percentage of them during certain points in history. Invariably, because DNA doesn't move how we think it moves. I have 0.02% of Jewish DNA in me. Ashkenaz. Not surprised. I literally have people in the Christian bloodline that are French German from that area. Most of the German that I have in me is from that area. So I'm like, at least on one side of the family. So I'm like, sounds plausible. Okay. So somewhere along the line, I had some great, grandma or grandpa that was Jewish. Well, there was a bunch of Jewish people in that area. It's okay. Sounds good to me. It made the Old Testament all the more interesting, I gotta say, because now all of a sudden, it doesn't matter how small it is in your DNA. Those people are your ancestors. Now you gotta learn about them, because they are a part of you. That's how it works. That's why they were very focused on the be fruitful and multiply, because it was about the coming together with the DNA to pass it forward. That's how you lived forever, because your DNA keeps going. Spiritually, soul-wise, you live forever because your soul is a piece of God. That's why your children are a piece of God, because you're a piece of God. We're all born in piece of God. If you have a soul in your body, you're a piece of God. And if you're walking around, you got a soul in your body. Chapter 11, verse 1. This one's called Propriety in Worship. Now, this is where we're going to get into me and Paul don't agree. And you're going to find out why very quickly. Actually, this is verse 2, because actually that last part. Follow me because I follow Christ. So, imitate people around you that have things going on in their life that you wish you had something like that. Don't ever want exactly what that person has. That's called coveting. Okay? You don't want to, because then you want to try to take that away from them, because it can't be not any car similar to that. It's got to be that exact one. So then I have to steal it because it's yours. That's really what coveting is, the thing that leads you to the sin of the other things. So it's a sin in and of itself, because it turns into a malice. To just be inspired by, so that you find a way to make that work in your life to gain a thing like that you like. To be like, hey, if they can get that, I can get that. Let me go do the work I got to do to go get that. That's fine. That's not coveting. Those are different things. Sins are usually, and that's the tricky thing with sins. If you're really paying attention to what they have in there enlisted as sins, you feel like it shouldn't be that hard. What makes it hard is it's everyday life stuff where our intention is wrong. So it really all starts in here. The Immaculate Heart is in here. So you gotta be willing to let go of those kinds of negative emotions to have that desire to be, boastful, to, whatever it is, to treat people poorly, to, focus on the ego and remember that you're one person amongst many. And I know it's hard because being a human, that's really the balance. Now, if you get into angel lore, I'll go into the rest of this. If you get into angel lore, they say that Lucifer and Michael, before the fall, were twins. Now, if you get into a lot more of the other metaphysics stuff, they also put the Archangel Michael at your solar plexus chakra, which, it's all about self-esteem. Understand that all that stuff, it's all about trying how to be a good person. So still the intention is directed the right way. So you can take the ideas of it, put the intention behind it with God, not praying to any other deity or anything, but use the idea of it or the methods of it, the meditation of it, because it's also quieting. And if you quiet, regardless of where the culture that it came from, he will rush in because your focus is on him. So it doesn't matter. They have that as self-esteem. And what is Lucifer's sin? Pride. What is pride, though? Pride is the display of ego. Ego versus self-esteem. The fallen angel, the demon, or the defender of God's army. And what better way to show my will to thy will than being willing to throw out your not so good nature, to focus on your better nature in service to him. So even if it's not true, I can see where they got it from. Because I'm not saying that's true. That's mind of God type stuff. I don't think there's anybody on earth who could actually tell you if any of that stuff is true or not true. So, propriety in worship, verse 2, chapter 11. I praise you for remembering me in everything and for holding to the teachings just as I pass them on to you. Now, I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ. And the head of every woman is man. No, it's not. In this culture, the belief system was a woman can only get to heaven by having the right husband who is holy enough, because as he goes, he pulls her up with him. She can't have her own independent relationship with God. That's the belief structure of this culture. That's the way that culture was. This is what their belief structure was. It doesn't mean that's what Jesus said. This is what Paul said. Now, would this be the culture that Jesus was raised in? Yes. Did Jesus display this behavior? Not really. Because if he had, he wouldn't have allowed all those women to follow him around. Well, that was a perfectly normal thing for men to do because they had to go seek their Messiah. It was not considered a normal thing for women to do. Because unattended, yes, there were some women there, but if you were the only woman in a tent city camp full of men in the middle of the desert, they're not going to be thinking nice things of you. But they didn't tend to think nice things of her anyway. Mary Magdalene, and she would have been the first one there. But there were others that followed, and there were more, and that would have made it more acceptable. But it was a big deal. So he already showed that he wasn't really holding those gender stereotypes. There are no isms in heaven. Heaven is love. Where is there love in isms? If your intention is to make someone else lesser than you, and that's what this is, then you're not in the love vibration, so then it doesn't hold. Then it's a limitation of the human being doing the speaking and not anything else. An apostle or no apostle. I mean, Jesus shows in his language when he was dealing with the Pharisees, with the culture, and with even the apostles, that their cultural context that they were coming from wasn't quite open and loving enough to fully get Jesus's message. That's why the last commandment was love one another. How does believing other people are incomplete and can't have their own independent relationships with God love? Aren't you just assuming they're not capable of doing something that you can do? On the basis of what? In these same times, any one of you could also be legally just decided that you were a slave, taken out to another country, and there would have been nothing you could do about it. If you don't want all of it, don't try to enforce any of it if it no longer applies within the love vibration. Picking and choosing. If you're going to preach for it, preach for it. It can't just be for what it brings an advantage to you, because you want to be able to do that thing that's not nice. He wants us to be nice. It's love vibration. Okay. And the head of every woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, because the crown chakra, the connection to source consciousness through the center of the head. There's a reason they're called payas. There's a reason why they wore the payas. Because when they were out in the world, you have to have the payas on to protect your crown chakra from anything not God trying to get in and talk to you. That's the point. Okay? Which is why you're not supposed to be wearing hats in churches. So if you're going to follow, then you got to follow. No hats inside. That's why there was that rule of no hats inside. It was for when you weren't at your home. And every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is just as though her head were shaved. If a woman does not cover her head, she should have her hair cut off. And it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut or shaved off. She should cover her head. Women have to intentionally block their connection to God to be socially acceptable in this culture. They must deny their right to have a soul. A man ought not cover his head, since he is the image of glory to God, but woman is glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman came from man. They're talking about back in Adam and Eve, and with the rib. Okay, well, Eve got created to be a companion. Companion doesn't mean, hey, I get to do whatever I want to you and you can say or do nothing. No, If you want to harm other people, you are out of alignment. If you want to abuse other people, you are out of alignment. If you want to make them lesser than you, you are out of alignment. Because what you do to the least of you, you do to me, says Jesus. This is Paul. You're only supposed to be imitating Paul if he brings you closer to God. This is not in alignment with love. Right? Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. For this reason, and because of the angels, the woman ought to have a sign of authority on her head. So, in that equation, then, if we have to wear something because that becomes the sign of authority on our head, if you're not wearing something, because what applies to us applies to you. As what you do to others, you do to God. So you put that same limitation on him. You do all that to him. Not based upon his gender. Because he didn't make it where this is only for men. He said everybody. Even animals. All of it. In the Lord, however, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. What you do to me, you do to yourself. What I do to you, we have to be equal. We are not independent of each other. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray with her head uncovered? Well, if you're watching this video and you're continuing to watch this video and you're not immediately offended the fact that I don't have a headdress on, I'm going to say you made your choice already. You probably think this is, well, the culture and the time, right? In the cultural context. Does not the very nature of things teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a disgrace to him? Now, also, I find that to be an interesting statement right there, because I'll remind you again, Paul is a Pharisee. So he's born consecrated. If you were not in the Levitical tribe and you wanted to be in service to the Lord and you needed to purify yourself, you did this thing where you took a Nazirite vow. And in a Nazirite vow, you're not allowed to cut your hair for an entire year. How do we usually depict Jesus? Oh, right. With the long hair. Because he's from the tribe of Judah, not the tribe of Levi. How did he become a rabbi? Oh, right, the Nazarite vow. Jesus of Nazareth. But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For long hair is given to her as a covering. My hair is the covering for my head. Wow. You mean the covering God gave me naturally? What a wonderful thing. If anyone wants to be contentious about this, we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. So he's literally saying that this is the custom. If you have a problem, this is the custom we've always had. So this is the custom that it was. We don't know why they started thousands of years ago covering their head like that. If you actually go back through in the Old Testament, I have yet to find the chapter in the Old Testament where it says that they had to wear hats. Like they had to wear the payas, or that the woman had to cover her hair, or it had anything. Nope. Now, I can also tell you, in a lot of other ancient cultures, they had a very much so the belief system that the women's hair and the beauty of it can make men crazy with lust. And you might get attacked because your hair was uncovered. Because the further back in history you go, the more excuses they made for people being terrible to each other. The more it was allowed. The less rights anybody had. I need you to understand, in the context of the world, the American Bill of Rights that we have, it didn't really exist in other places. You didn't have a lot of rights under the law. The king really could just do whatever he wanted. Your rights were whatever he decided that you as a person who he didn't even know and was going to judge you based upon your position in life that you were never allowed to leave. And you might be like, that seems... The whole Old Testament has all the tribes set up that way. You have to take a Nazirite vow if you're not in the Levitical Jewish tribe. They married within their tribes. They were marrying their relatives just like the nobles were. The nobles didn't get it out of nowhere. They got it out of here. So we read all of it. Because if you want to understand why people were doing some things that we couldn't quite understand, you have to understand the cultural context they were in. So in Paul's time, that would have been acceptable to say these things. If you go about saying these things now, I'm going to tell you, you're not in the love vibration. You're going to bring yourself a heap of trouble anywhere you are. I do not recommend that you go about that path. Man is forever put their own limitations on God. Man probably will forever put their own limitations on God. The more we evolve as a species, which should look like being nicer to each other, not meaner to each other, for context, because he said, love one another. Love one another. So if it's not out of a heart of love, it's not the right choice. It will make us nicer as we rise. We will become a nicer as peoples. When we're in that place and we're coming from that place, then we're doing what he wants us to do. Historically, each person can only understand whatever messages they're receiving from any input. I don't care where it's coming from, based upon the level of healed that they are in their heart. Remember that today as you're interacting with people in the world.